Hello there, Carstairs here. Let's get straight to it. Should you buy a mini lathe? Absolutely not. Do not buy a Chinese mini lathe. Spend 3 times the money and get one that runs straight out of the box. However, I did buy one, and I want to show you what I've done to it in this video. I wanted to make it a bit of a sort of repository for modifications and where you can get further information and tutorials on things. I don't want to really make this into a how to do the mods video. There's videos online already about how to do the mods, so there's no point really redoing them. They're perfectly fine to follow, and as we go through the video, I'll link in the description below links to the videos, tutorials that show you how to do the mods. And I guess, we'll talk about the wider implications of having one of these machines. I'm not really going to go into the specs of the machine. There's countless videos where you can find all that information. I think really you've come here for my opinion on this and what mods I've done to it, so there's no point going over loads of information when it's perhaps not going to be relevant. Now, as you can see, mine's a Clarke CL300M mini lathe, and it's basically a Chinese mini lathe that probably made in the same factory as all the others, but I bought it in the lockdown in 2020, April 2020. It's October 2024 now, so I've had it a good few years. I bought it from Sitebox in the UK. It was about 650 quid. They've gone up a bit since then. And I bought it in the UK because I wanted it to have a warranty, and it came with a UK plug and etc. etc. If anything went wrong, I could contact Sitebox and they'd sort it out. So yeah, I did look online at just getting a mini lathe direct from China. Now, when I looked, at the time, they were just like offering direct from China or Lithuania, some were based in, with like loads of accessories, cutters and chucks and things like that. But the accessories, they're cheap and nasty. It's got 500 piece accessories and things like that, but you're better off really just buying things as you need it. But when I was researching this video, what I found was they're not doing that anymore. I could only find lathes listed on like eBay that were based in the UK from sellers like Amadeal and Sitebox, things like that. The deals with the 500 pieces, they're gone. You just get the basic lathe and the things that come with it, which on this lathe is not a lot. The only thing accessory wise you get with this lathe is this dead center. That's it. There's nothing else. Plus, if you're importing a lathe from overseas, you'd have to pay import duty on it anyway, which is 20%. The cheapest CL300M that I could find for sale now on the internet is £780. Discussing a bit more as to why you shouldn't buy a mini lathe. The main problem, the standout problem with this lathe is rigidity. It's just not rigid enough. You get problems with the carriage. I've had to do shimming and things like that with it. This is my first lathe. I knew practically nothing about lathes, and I think that's the problem is that when you're doing projects and you're making something and you're thinking, if I had a lathe, this would be, I could do this and I could do that. And if you're putting bits and pieces into drills to make parts, and you're thinking, if I had a lathe, and you think, do I really need one? Would I use it? And you get pushed into this entry point. But if you're thinking, do I need a lathe? You need a lathe. It's as simple as that. So don't, you buy cheap, buy twice. Don't buy one of these. Just spend the extra money 2 or 3 times, what one of these costs, and get a better one. You know, the only time that I would think I would recommend one of these is if you really pushed for space. If you know, and the other positive, I guess, is you can move this yourself. When you start getting into bigger lathes, you're going to need help, and you know, I'm down here in my cellar workshop, so I've got to get it down the stairs and things like that. But yeah, the only thing, if space is a problem, that kind of thing, yeah, okay, yeah, fine. If you've got no alternative. So now I want to get into talking a bit more about the mods that I've done to this lathe. And first thing you should do is bolt the lathe down to a good strong surface. I bolted mine down, and I used the legs that came with it as extra bracing for the lathe, and it's worked out really well. So what you'll notice is on this, the backlash is horrendous. The backlash is the amount you can move the cross slide screw without it actually engaging into the threads. It's just huge. So the very first thing that I modified on this lathe was these screws here. The lathe comes with cap screws that go on there, and it's typical of this lathe, the cost cutting, and it just being good enough, you know. The thing with the cap screw is that they stuck out too far, and when you're turning, you know, you're catching your finger on the cap thing, and it's very uncomfortable to use. And so, you know, a lot of people put these lower profile screws on, and it solves the problem. And you just think, well, why didn't they just do that to start with, you know, for the ease of the user? And you just get into this cycle of bill of materials. The problem is that the cap screw that they use is, I believe, used to hold the head on as well. So there's already 3 of those cap screws specified. Now, if they had to specify just 2 low profile screws for each lathe, they might have to get them. They'd have to specify 2 unique screws, and maybe get them from a different supplier, which adds to the bill of materials, supply issues and things like that. If they just specify 2 more cap screws, get them from the same supplier, get a bigger discount as well. So, you know, that's just really typical of this lathe. The other modification that I made to the handles was making these handle bits independent, so they turn independently of the axle. The original ones that came with it molded in one piece, and when you're actually turning, you're normally holding and turning like that. But if you need to pull the carriage back or forward a good way, having a handle that's fixed like that, it's just uncomfortable to use. So doing that mod, it just makes it easier when you're moving the carriage any kind of way, the distance. There's 2 handles that come specified on this lathe. There's these ones which are solid, but there's also ones where this part screws into the axle bit, which is fine when you're turning one way, but you start turning the other way, it just unscrews the handle. So I ordered these replacement handles, got them from Amadeal, and they came as the ones that this part screws into. So the hole was already there, and I just ground the threads off and tapped this part, and that solves that problem. Sticking around this part of the lathe, one of the first mods I did was the Apron mod, and this is good for keeping the chips out of the cogs, and just used a piece of Perspex acrylic, whatever it is, on that. Fairly straightforward to do and well worth it, because after 4 years, there's no detritus inside the cogs, so it's worked really well. The tip that I would give you is, if you've got a lathe like this that's got this double curve shape, you obviously need to make the perspex or the cover conform to it. The thing to do is make the cover oversized and then screw it on and then file it so that it's flush, and that's a lot easier than trying to trace it out and what have you. Steve Jordan's got a very good tutorial on this apron cover, which is linked in the description below. Another quick easy mod is a chip tray. It really does help keep swarf off the ways, and just they collect there, and just made out of a piece of scrap metal that I've bent. Used the original, there's two screws already, two holes already tapped and drilled and tapped in there for a accessory, so I used those, and I curved it to try and keep any that do fall off from not falling onto the lead screw. Some of the contraptions that people have for covering the lead screw, and also concertina things that people put on these, you know, to stop the chips, but just a simple piece of metal's fine. What this lathe doesn't come with is a carriage stop. There's no way of locking the carriage so that it doesn't move, which makes facing off and sometimes parting off nigh on impossible, because the carriage is being pushed back, so you need to lock it to keep it from doing that. Now, some people say this lathe does come with a carriage lock. All you need to do is put the lead screw into neutral, which stops it turning when the headstock is turning, and then engage the half nut onto the lead screw, and that locks the carriage in place. That's okay, I guess, but the problem is you're putting the pivot point there, so the carriage is going to want to bend or try and move back on an angle. So what I've done is what most people do, and just add on a carriage stop, which is just a piece of metal with a T-piece underneath, and you can lock it, and that just stops the carriage moving, and you've got the lock right in the center, or pretty much in the center of the carriage, and it gives, I think it's much better than having it pivot in case it did move. So as you can see, I just operated with this cut down Allen key and put a little brass ball on there to help using it, and just a quarter of a turn locks the carriage. So there's two types of saddle that come on these lathes. I can see there's this type which has got this pit not filled, it's same on the other side, and I guess they've done that to save material and weight maybe, but there is another type which is, this is just one solid piece. Now if you're making a carriage stop and you've got the one that's one piece, it's a lot easier, because all you need to do is drill a hole, get your T-piece and some means of tightening it up. An Amadeal do a specific carriage stop for that type of lathe, so you can just buy it, and you know, all you need to do is drill the hole for it. So I want to talk a bit about the tool post now, and I think very quickly you'll find that you want to upgrade it. The one that comes with it is a right pin. You can put 4 cutters in it, and you index it, but you end up catching your hand on the sharp points when you've got them sticking out like that. The other problem with the original tool post is, unless you're using these 8mm cutters and tools on the post, you need to shim the cutter to make it so that it's exactly in the center of the chuck. If you don't do that, you'll end up leaving little nubs sticking out, so you need your cutter to be exactly in the center of the chuck. So who's got time to be shimming the cutters? You know, nightmare. You know, you could say, why don't you just use these, but they're garbage. I just don't get along with them at all. I much prefer the carbide insert type. So upgrading your tool post will make it so that you can easily change between cutters, and you can adjust them so they'll be spot on in the middle, so you can take one out and grab another one, put it in, lock it, and you know that it's set straight away to be in the center. And it just makes life so much easier. Now, you will be tempted to buy a cheap aluminium tool post which has got a piston that comes out to lock it in. This one's got a gib type one to lock in. Do not buy the aluminium one. If you're cutting anything harder than cheese, it's going to wear out straight away. Ask me how I know. And yeah, what happens is, if you're cutting steel, you know, aluminium, it just wears, and it starts to, and when you're parting off with it and it starts to go like that, it's a nightmare, you know. This particular tool post is what a lot of people go to. Steve Jordan's got information on these and a review of them. It's just, I think, really known as the 250000, which is the model for the actual tool post, and then you can get different types of holders. There's several different types for holding different things. This one's like the standard one, which just holds straight tools, 250001, and then number 2 is, I can't remember, I think it's a parting off tool, and you can get a knurling tool and one for holding boring bars. But they're all available separately, or you can buy them as a kit. So you can easily add standard tool holders to this tool post. They're not expensive. I think they're about 50 quid, something like that. And the tool holders, I think I saw 12-13 pounds for the base one. So it's not expensive and it's good. I've had no problems with this whatsoever. It just makes life so much easier, and it does a good job. Now, the next mod I did was to change the spindle bearings for the chuck plate. These come with these sealed ball bearings. There's one there and one at the back, and you change these for tapered bearings. They're not expensive, they're about 20 quid each, the bearings, but it's a big job to do it. This has all got to come off. All the gears at the back have got to come off. You've got to get a head off. Then you've got to push out the spindle, change the bearings, put it all back together. It is doable. There's several tutorials, videos that I've linked to in the description below. Just got to take your time with it, really. And the main thing that I think I can tell you is remember the spacer. There's a plastic spacer at the back. It needs to be made shorter because the new bearings are 3mm wider than these, so that spacer needs to be shortened to accommodate that. And also, while you're in there and you've got the spindle out, I think it's worth changing the change gears. The 2 plastic change gears in there to metal ones, just so that you know that you're not going to break a tooth off and have to strip the whole thing down to replace. And these are really useful once you've got them out for tapping in the new ones. So the next mod on this journey is to get a collet chuck. If you're turning bar stock, you know, this makes a world of difference to the 3-jaw chuck that comes with the lathe. They're not expensive, 80mm diameter, bolt on, bolt off, super easy to do. You can get the chuck on its own, or you can get it with a set of collets. And the thing with these is, I like them because I can put delicate parts in them. I often use it to reshape the heads of screws, and I don't want the shaft of the screw to be damaged by the chuck, which in the 3-jaw chuck is impossible. But what I've also found is because you've got more contact area with the part, it runs more concentrically, and it just improves the rigidity as well, I've found. If you don't do anything else to your lathe and you're turning bar stock a lot, get a collet chuck. They're just it's transformed this lathe, and I haven't looked back with it really. So I want to talk to you now about the tailstock locking mechanism. When I bought this lathe, there was two features I wish it had, which it doesn't. One was a tachometer, more on that later, and the other is a cam lock system for locking the tailstock in place. You can see now that this one does have a cam lock on it, but before it just comes with a nut that you tighten up to hold down the tailstock, which is a major pain. Oh, just a nightmare. If you think about what you'd say you want to drill a 10mm hole in a piece of stock, you know, you'd start out where you'd use your center drill. So you'd obviously have to move the tailstock closer. Then when you want to put your first drill bit in, you have to move it back and put a small drill bit in, say, you know, start like a 4mm, so, you know, move that and put it in, and then you want to go up to maybe, you know, like a 7mm, so again you've got to take it out and loosen the nut and tighten it up, and then you've got to put the final one in, etc, and it gets tedious. It really does get tedious. What I found was using a ratcheting spanner alleviated the problem, rather than just having to take an open spanner on and off all the time. You could just put this on and then flip it the other way, and you can tighten it up without having to take it off. But yeah, just a pain. But what made the nut just absolutely unbearable for me, unusable even, was that I make very small parts, make screws, so I'm working with the tailstock very close to the chuck, and obviously you've got this in the way, and you know, I could be working like that, and it's difficult to get a spanner in there, sometimes impossible, so it had to go. So what I did, as you can see, is I've converted it to a cam lock system. You can get these kits from little machine shop in the US. The kit itself is $30, and then there's $20 shipping. So you know, it's the thick end of 50 quid, but it is so worth it, and it's relatively easy to do. All you need to do is drill a hole through the body of the tailstock, and yeah, it's just so much better now. There is something that I modified on it. I modified this lever, this one I made myself. The one that comes with it is just this pokey thing down here, and you having to reach down and things like that. So I made my own lever so that it's up here, and as you're moving, if you've got the tail stock locked there, you just pull that, and you know, your hand's in the right place to move the tailstock. So that works really well. Now with the tailstock, what a lot of people do report is having issues aligning the tailstock with the center of the chuck. I really haven't had an issue with that. Obviously you need that to be spot on in the middle, the tailstock spot on in the middle of the chuck if you're drilling or tapping, whatever, turning between centers, needs to be bob on that. But people have found it difficult to adjust the tailstock. So there's a screw underneath which you loosen off, and then the tailstock can move along its base, and I find that just tapping it with a soft mallet, just ever so slightly, will get it lined up. As you can see, I've changed all the levers on the lathe to my own that I made. The 9.5mm bar stock here with these matching machine balls so that they all look the same. The one thing that I did find was a problem, which is why I've extended it, is the lever for taking on and off the tool post. I put a longer lever on it so I could get more purchase, as I found that sometimes it wasn't tight enough and the tool post was turning when I was turning a piece. So that's improved that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the one thing that this, or the other thing that didn't come with this lathe was a tachometer. And it is really useful having a tachometer readout, because you can, it just aids you in setting your speed. Now, Clarke do make a tachometer for this lathe, which is an accessory, but it's £95, and with shipping it's going to be like 100. This one costs 10, so that's a no-brainer, but it's worth fitting one of these to it. So it is a bit tricky to fit one of these, because you've got the readout up there, but that needs to be fed by the sensor, which is just there, and there's a power supply for it in there, so those three need to meet up. Now, what I did was, I didn't want the tacho to take up another plug or USB plug. I wanted it to be an internal thing where when you switch on the lathe, the tacho comes on. So this works, I believe, on 6 to 12 volts, so you can run it as low as 6, high as 12. I had a spare multi-voltage power supply, which I've stripped the board out of, cut into the mains feed for the lathe, and put a spur off it, and the board is in there. So that's all internal. And there's the sensor for it. I just made a bracket out of some scrap brass there, and there is a screw which holds the back plate on, which you can use to mount the bracket. And then there is actually a little hole just down there which pre-exists, so you can feed the wire through that. And there's a magnet, neodymium magnet, that I've arroldited on there, which activates the sensor as it goes past. So I just want to talk a bit now about what I think the heart of the problems with this lathe really come down to is I just had a constant battle with the rigidity of the saddle, and consequently the cutting tools and the compounds. The saddle just would not be rigid. You know, there's the way you adjust it is there's two plates under there which hold it onto the way there and at the back, and there's screws under there which you tighten and it clamps down more on the ways, but obviously it's a trade-off. You don't want it too tight that you can't move the carriage. I was just finding that I'd adjust it and then the screws would shake loose, so we'd be back to square one. What I did was, there's the 3 screws which clamp it on, and then there's some weird grub screw adjustment screws. I got rid of the adjustment screws, so now I'm just running it with 3, the original 3 screws, and I've put some springs on the screws to stop them shaking loose, and that has improved the movement to 0 on the carriage, which is really good. But I was still having a problem with sort of a lateral movement. So the way I combated the play in the saddle laterally is I got a feeler gauge set and selected some shims and super glued them to the saddle, so it fills the void between the edge of the way there and the saddle. So I did that on both sides, and there's no movement now, so that's helped a lot with that. So that's all I've got for you mod wise that I've done to this lathe. I got this lathe to facilitate my hobbies, not for the lathe to become a hobby, which I feel kind of like somewhat it has. You know, with everything, constantly thinking about how I can combat the problems with it, doing the research, looking back, just buy a good lathe. I recommend watching a channel called Artisan Makes. He bought a Chinese mini lathe and it was a wreck, So he basically redid it, he ground all the ways. So after watching his video on that and the things he's done to his lathe, I wanted to get at least a UK unit, because you pay more, but the manufacturers, I mean, they're not manufacturers, they're just rebranded. You know, people like Clarke, Sieg, and the others, they pay more to have the product finished, obviously in their colouring, and hopefully to have the thing finished to a higher standard, so that it's a reasonable machine when it gets to the customer, but still not brilliant. As well as combating the rigidity of issues of this lathe, most of the mods are about making it easier to use. And take the example of the cap screws on the handles here. They worked, you know, they weren't very comfortable to use, but you could still use it with those screws. Same example on the handle is a fixed one when it comes. It works, you know, just not very good to use. And I think that's what you'll find is, if you bought a better machine and paid more, these problems just wouldn't exist. So if you watch Artisan Makes channel, he has just recently upgraded his mini lathe to a bigger one, and that, I think, if I was going in entry level, I would start where he's upgraded from, because it just looks a much better proposition than having to do all this to a lathe. So there's lots more you can do to this lathe. I mean, Artisan Makes, he filled his with, he braced the headstock and he filled the voids in the ways and in the headstock bracket with a resin granite fill, you know, and you can change all the handles. These ones are proper janky. Most people will find that the compound just doesn't get tight enough. I got mine set really tightly, and a lot of people have drilled extra grub screws into these to make the gib more effective, but I just have mine quite tight because I don't use the compound much. I just use it really for facing off. So a few companies which I use to buy bits and pieces: Amadeal. You can get the replacement belts, you can get loads of replacement parts. They sell mini lathes, but you can get loads of replacement parts, you know, compounds and tailstocks and wheels and everything for it. And RGD Tools, they sell mini lathes, and they sell Myford lathes and all sorts of accessories, which I get regularly from them. There's a channel called DEEZ, and I watched his video recently where he gave his thoughts on his Vevor Chinese mini lathe that he's had for a couple of years. And I think we basically reached the same conclusion, although I don't recommend buying one of these. He did say if you want to take a chance, then, you know, buy one, but I wouldn't. But, you know, we made the same conclusions. I think that it's cheaply made. If you buy a brand one, you get more finishing, more usability out of the box. But if you just buy an ordinary Chinese mini lathe, you know, it's a parts bin job. Really, it's just as he points out in his video. So as you use this lathe and get to know it, you'll notice its shortcomings fairly quickly. You know, you're going to want power cross slide, you're going to want proper carriage stop, tailstock that's right, just things like that, and you know, issues that crop up, like the handles. You know, you will have to sort that if you buy a proper or a better, more expensive lathe to start with. So these are just my musings really on this lathe and how I've got along with it. The thing with it is it's just good enough. It's, you know, it's like, as I was saying about the cap screws on the handles, you know, they work. They're not very comfortable to use, and I think the other thing about upgrading this lathe is making it easier to use is the crux of the matter, as well as the rigidity. You know, it's just good enough. You know, the fact that that doesn't turn independently, you know, it still worked. You know, that's the thing. So I'm going to end the video here. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing, and links to buy me a coffee are down in the description below. Thanks for watching.